Tonight, we begin with a confrontation that Pentagon officials had anticipated, feared, and prepared for. A standoff that unfolded not over weeks, but in mere hours. Hours that tested American resolve in the Taiwan Strait. Hours that provoked Beijing's sharpest response in decades. Hours that brought the world's two superpowers to the edge of something dangerous. What the United States military did today crossed a line that Beijing had warned would not be tolerated. And when that line broke, China did not hesitate. They responded with fury, precision, and a warning that left no room for interpretation. For weeks now, there had been indicators, not official statements, not formal protests, just indicators that Beijing was preparing something significant. China has been assertive, yes, but they have been calculated in their assertiveness. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells at Indo-Pacific Command this week was that the pattern went silent. Analysts who monitor PLA movements know the indicators. The encrypted burst transmissions, the repositioning of destroyers near Fujian, the sudden grounding of civilian flights near the Strait, the recall of military officials from diplomatic posts, all of that went quiet. And whenever Beijing goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday, U.S. Pacific Command detected what they described as an authorized military transit through contested airspace, including a C-40 transport aircraft that had not flown that specific corridor in over 2 decades. These are the kinds of flights that Washington only authorizes when signaling something very specific. Support for Taipei, defiance of Beijing's claims, or a deliberate test of Chinese response. Intelligence officials didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Beijing was recalculating. And when a nuclear power shifts posture without explanation, even by a small measure, Washington pays attention. The warning issued by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official described Washington's flyover as provocative, reckless, and perhaps most importantly, a direct violation of the One China principle. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. The Pentagon did not. In fact, their response today was among the most direct we've seen in U.S.-China relations. Here's what we know. Within 4 hours of Beijing's formal protest, the Department of Defense reaffirmed America's commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act. These weren't diplomatic platitudes. These were policy declarations, statements that Washington only issues when preparing to hold firm. Tonight, defense officials confirmed that Washington authorized additional reconnaissance operations near the Taiwan Strait, including flights over international waters that Beijing had recently declared restricted for military exercises. The Pentagon acted before China could normalize those restrictions. They flew surveillance missions near the Pratas Islands. They repositioned the USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group. They activated early warning systems across Okinawa. In other words, Washington targeted Beijing's ability to control the narrative, the information advantage that would have made their exclusion zone credible. This is what made China's warning so urgent. Beijing's move wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. It represented the kind of incremental pressure that could reshape regional security if left unchallenged. And Washington, understanding that fully, responded with resolve. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't escalate to direct confrontation. They didn't abandon Taiwan to ambiguity. They reinforced deterrence. They signaled commitment. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Beijing's latest posture was designed to probe American resolve after months of domestic political distraction in Washington. China wanted to see whether the U.S. would equivocate. But instead, the opposite happened. The Pentagon didn't equivocate. They issued a response that was so swift, so unified, that even Beijing took notice. You don't get China's attention easily. But today, Washington did. Defense analysts speaking with NBC News described Beijing's shift as calibrated escalation, a way to test boundaries without triggering conflict. But Washington proved today that they remain both capable and committed. Their actions were not only decisive, they were calibrated so precisely that they avoided Beijing's stated red lines while reinforcing American presence. That precision matters because it shows strategic sophistication. It shows that Washington is not merely reacting. They are anticipating. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about Washington's response. Indo-Pacific Command carried out coordinated air patrols, forcing Chinese aircraft to alter trajectories. Naval intelligence monitored communication nodes that had been upgraded in recent weeks. Cyber Command reportedly disrupted networks used by the PLA to coordinate South China Sea activities. This wasn't just diplomacy. This wasn't just posturing. This was integrated deterrence. This was strategic messaging. And strategic messaging is what Beijing has struggled to counter since tensions escalated. Remember, Beijing thought Washington was distracted. They thought American alliances were fracturing. They thought time favored their position. But tonight, the opposite is happening. Taiwan is receiving unprecedented security assistance. Regional allies are increasing defense budgets, and American commitment appears stronger than Beijing calculated. What makes this moment so volatile and so consequential is that China's move happened when President Xi Jinping faces significant domestic pressure. Nationalists demand action on Taiwan. Reformers demand economic stability. Military leaders demand demonstrated capability. Party hardliners demand consequences for American interference. Xi is balancing these demands while managing economic headwinds. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not acting from strength. They're acting from pressure. The State Department's statement, now circulating through diplomatic channels, signals that Washington will not accept unilateral changes to the status quo. Officials stated plainly that China's actions were inconsistent with international law and established norms. That is diplomatic language for, we reject your claims and won't be intimidated. You don't hear that tone unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Taiwan's president addressed the nation in a measured, defiant speech tonight. She said, "We will not yield to threats." She said, "Democracy is our foundation." And she said, "We stand with partners who value freedom." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a government that understands the stakes. Here's what makes this more concerning. Beijing's move wasn't isolated. Along with the diplomatic warning, the PLA Navy conducted live fire exercises near Kinmen, Coast Guard vessels, increased South China Sea patrols. State media amplified nationalist rhetoric targeting Washington. Analysts are considering several possibilities. Beijing may be preparing sustained pressure on Taiwan. They may be attempting to fracture American alliances, or they may be normalizing military coercion as policy. But today, Washington took that option off the table. What we're watching is a test of resolve. Beijing wants to see if Washington will sustain this posture. Washington wants to demonstrate that commitment isn't conditional. Tonight, intelligence officials are monitoring PLA movements in real time. They say Chinese forces haven't stood down. They say additional assets are moving toward the strait, but Washington is not backing down. Their response, swift, coordinated, unmistakable, sent Beijing a message: this administration will not be bullied. As days unfold, more details will emerge about Beijing's intentions. But Washington's response was timely. It reassured Taiwan. It reinforced alliances. It established boundaries. What happens next depends on Beijing's choices. And tonight, for the first time in years, Beijing appears to be recalculating. Zhang Nanhai is quiet, too quiet, because tonight, China learned something familiar. American resolve is real. American alliances endure. American power remains credible. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The line has been drawn. The stakes are defined. The world is watching, and we will be here as the next phase unfolds.